So nobody went over there because the only way in and out was that same pathway, and the only big thing over there was Country Bear Jamboree, which nobody in California even knew what it was. So on busy days, maybe only 2% of the Disney guests ever went into bear country. A honey of a place since 1972 only went into bear country. It's now critter country, by the way. But went over into bear country. And so it's like, how can we direct more people over there? We need to have an attraction, at least one other attraction, to tempt people to come over. Now the other problem, or the other challenge actually, was that Dick Nunes, who was in charge of the parks, wanted a log ride. He wanted a log ride because in 1969, Knott's Berry Farm, which was just down the block, had a log ride, which was called the Calico Log Ride. It's now called, I think, the Big Timber Log Ride or something like that. But the Calico Log Ride, it was dedicated by John Wayne. And people loved it. People loved it. And the more that Dick Nunes went to the Imagineers and said, we have to have a log ride, the Imagineers go, that's exactly why we can't have a log ride, because Disneyland is different. We have different things than the other parks. We appeal, so they were battling back and forth. Now, the other challenge was America Sings was closing. When Carousel of Progress moved from California to Walt Disney World, the same theater existed where the audience rotates and what had happened is Mark Davis had created a song, and a series of songs actually, and characters for 1974 called America Sings, which would tell the entire history of America in song. Because, of course, in 1976 is the bicentennial. So you want to have that, you want to bring people in. But now, 10 years later, in 1984, people are going, why do we have a singing eagle and owl and geese in Tomorrowland? This doesn't seem to make sense. And by golly, our partners right now, one of our partners is George Lucas. So George Lucas came up with a design that the Carousel Theater, the same as we have out here, Carousel Progress Theater, would remain in Tomorrowland, but a flying saucer would have crashed into it. And that flying saucer would have contained a space circus with a 3-armed ringmaster, P.T. Quantum. And so as you went up into the theater, basically you were seeing these space acts perform while they're waiting to be rescued. As that goes, doesn't that sound cooler than a bunch of animals going, Yankee Doodle went to town. Oh yeah, let's go with this. So when you design an attraction for Disney, you can't just go, oh well, this is a cool idea. What you've got to do is you've got to justify, not only the money but the time, because it takes an amount of time to design, it takes an amount of time to build, and all of this. So Tony Baxter, who is just let go as an Imagineer from Disney, he was on the I-5, the 5 freeway. If any of you have been to California, you know that the I-5 is actually not a freeway. It's a parking lot that sometimes inches along, sometimes when you least expect it. And so he was driving from his home to Disneyland, and the Anaheim Hills were in the back. Now, this is sort of an exaggeration. In California there, we really don't have, we have more mountains than they have here in Florida, but these are little itty-bitty things, but they're in the background there. And he was taking a look, and he thought, if we had like a mountain type thing, that would be something that would attract attention and bring people into bear country. And if it's a mountain, it's high enough that you could have it as a log ride, because you can use gravity to spin that down. And by gosh, America Sings is closing, and what they would do at that particular point is they would take the audio animatronics and they would pull them apart for parts, basically cannibalize them, if they couldn't be used somewhere else. Sometimes they are used somewhere else. When you go and you see Thomas Jefferson in the Hall of Presidents, and then you go over to the great movie ride, when you see that sheriff popping up with the rifle firing away, that's Tom Jefferson. When you see William Howard Taft in the Hall of Presidents, go wave to him in Spaceship Earth, because he's a eunuch in the Roman scene. So, because it's easier, if something is already built, you just put on a different wig, you put on a different costume, you can reconfigure that. But with these animals, there was no home for 100 audio animatronic animals that were really cute. And Tony Baxter said, well, since we already have them, if we install them in the ride, that gives more value to the ride, but we don't have to spend money on the audio animatronics. And in fact, there are more audio animatronics in the ride out in Disneyland than they are out here in Florida. There's actually over 100 out in California, because they stole them from America Sings. Out here, we have about 60 or so, because you had to build them again from scratch. And two of the geese from America Sings got their feathers plucked, and they are the two droids in Star Tours in the queue. That's why they're called G2, and G4, because G stands for geese. So they're also out here in our Star Tours. Well, once you've got feathers off you, you look like a droid. So that's it. That's how that works. So Tony Baxter immediately ran into work, and he says, I've got a great idea. We can solve all three of our challenges. We can solve the fact that nobody's coming to Bear Country. We can give Dick Nunes, a log ride. And by golly, we can save all of these great audio animatronics. And so they went and they pulled all the model sheets and the artwork for Song of the South. And one of the things they realized was Mark Davis, who had created all these audio animatronics for America Sings, was one of the animators on Song of the South. So the designs just matched. All you had to build was Briar Fox and Briar Rabbit and Briar Bear. By golly, this is perfect. And so they do what they do at Imagineering. They came up with storyboards. They came up with 30 storyboards to show what was doing. They came up with a model. And Walt always liked models. He said, because drawings lie, but models you can always play around and pick at. And so they came up with this, and this is all completed in 1 month. Other Imagineers wanted to push their projects, so they were not supportive. Everybody thinks that Disney is this one happy magic kingdom. It's actually a bunch of separate fiefdoms that all report to the same king, and they often try to cut the legs out from other people so that they can move in. So, the big show, to show Michael Eisner, the very first time he came to Imagineering, they had all the models, they had all this laid out. They shoved Tony in the back of the room in a dark corner. Now, Michael Eisner brought along with him his 14-year-old son, Breck, who's later gone on to be a movie director. And so Michael comes in, and Marty Sklar and all these other Imagineers, they're not paying attention to a 14-year-old kid. This is Michael Eisner. This is the guy who's going to be signing my paychecks, whether I still stay here or whatever. And so they're showing him around and all this. And after a while, Michael looks around and wonders where his son is. His son is in the back corner with Tony playing with Splash Mountain. And so Michael Eisner goes back there and takes a look. And Eisner says, we just keep appealing to an older crowd. We need to appeal to a younger crowd. And my son really likes this. Eisner made decisions based on that. One of his children loved gummy bears. That's why there was an animated Gummy Bears TV series, just because his kids loved them. So Michael said, oh, yeah, this is good. This is good. But they were so backed up with so many other projects, it took 2 years for this to be greenlit, to get started. And Michael Eisner said, and we can't use Uncle Remus. He says, you can't use Uncle Remus in the ride. So they came up with Briar Frog. So if any of you have seen the movie, there's a point where Remus is sitting there, and he lights Briar Frog's pipe, so he's obviously a friend of Uncle Remus. So Briar Frog is telling the story, and this is very apparent in the Walt Disney World version out here. And the other problem they had was the tar baby. Now, some of you are familiar with that story, where basically what they did is Briar Fox and Briar Bear create a tar figure and put clothing on it and a pipe in it and all that. And by golly, when he doesn't say hello to Briar Rabbit sticks his fist in there and his foot, and the more he struggles, the more he gets caught. And for many years, that was a term of, if you're confronted with a problem, you better be careful that it doesn't become a tar baby, that you don't get stuck and pull and all of this. In fact, Vietnam at one time was called a tar baby. That, you're stuck in there so deeply that the more you try to struggle, the more you just get stuck. However, since that time, especially in the 40s, tar baby started to become a derogatory term, just like the N-word, that was used especially for young African-American children. And so Eisner says, well, we can't use that. And in the 1980s, the Disney storybooks that told the story, instead of having a tar baby, had a white glue baby. Well, that wasn't going to work for the attraction. So any of you who've been on the attraction, you know that what they substituted was honey. So what he is he's stuck in honey, he can't get out. And of course the storyline of Splash Mountain is pretty much the storyline in Song of the South. Briar Rabbit runs away from home, he has a bunch of misadventures, he outwits Briar Fox and Briar Bear a couple of times, but he is finally caught. And of course Briar Rabbit, being very, very smart, using his head instead of his feet, he says, don't throw me in the briar patch with all those little, pokey things sticking out and all of that. And in fact, that's a southern term. That's where we get things like pumpkin patch from. There's actually a possum patch and all that. It actually just refers to a piece of land that has predominantly something on it. And so, of course, what happens is Briar Fox, not using his head. He keeps catching Briar Rabbit, and Briar Rabbit keeps escaping. But what he does is he throws Briar Rabbit into the briar patch. But the rabbit, he was born and bred in the briar patch, so he knows how to go through the little thorns and all that and escape. You are thrown into the briar patch as well. That is a 52-feet drop. That's 5 stories. You're going approximately 40 miles an hour down a 47-foot incline. It used to be 45, but what happened is there was just too much water. The first time they tried to do Splash Mountain, the water came up so much, Tony Baxter had to get in his car and drive home and change. And there was water in the log, and there was, it was just a mess. And so then they started using sandbags instead of people in there, to try and adjust the water levels. And who should drop by but Michael Eisner? Gee, I'd like to ride that. Well, Michael, we're still adjusting the water level. No, I'd really like to ride. No, Michael, come back in about a week or so. No, I'd really like to ride that. So they got a black trash bag, and they cut a hole in it, and they put Eisner's head through it to try and give him some protection whatsoever. And the other Imagineers piled on behind him, and they're going through, and the thing is bouncing because, again, water will do what water wants to do. And again, the weight of somebody in there will affect that. So if any of you want to go on Splash Mountain, you definitely want to come and find me. Okay? Because it'll go a lot faster down that. Yeah, I'm wondering. Well, you see, you realize that matter cannot be destroyed. So all of you out there who have lost weight, those fat molecules just float in the air and they attach themselves directly to me. So I thank you so much for all that. But anyway, they've got, and Eisner wants to get in the front, which is where you're going to get the wettest. And so they're piled behind him, and there's still construction going on. So Tony Baxter's constantly yelling out, duck, so that because there's scaffolding going back and forth and all that. And so they go up, they go right down, and by gosh, the worst case scenario, water all over the place, all of this. They come to the unload area. What is Michael Eisner going to say? And he steps out of the boat and he goes, "Can we do that again?" And again, what they also do is they have water cannons. There's a dozen water cannons that go out. So when you see it come down, that's not just the splash and the force from that. There's water cannons along the side that are shooting out. And the reason for that is to warn those of you who are watching, you may get wet. You know, don't come to us later and say, "Oh my gosh, I'm wet." You know, you see right now this is going to be wet. And again, they adjust that depending upon weather as well too. Because early on a hot day, you're going to like being wet. Late at night, not so much. So this way they can adjust that as they go through. And the purpose of Splash Mountain is to take you through just as the film was. That you're with Uncle Remus, or in this case, Briar Frog, and suddenly as you go inside, there's all of the bright colors. All of the bright colors of cartoons. You're in the cartoon. And again, everything in Splash Mountain is concrete except for two things. Oh, tell us, Jim. We laughed at most of your jokes. Maybe you could tell us now what those two things are. Because when we tell our friends and family, not any of them are going to say, "Did you hear that from Jim Korkis?" They're going to go, "You know everything." The only two things that are not concrete are the zippity-doo-dah lady, the big finale, the big showboat. That is not concrete. And you'll also notice that there is a little donkey cart over to the side. Actually, that survived from America Sings. And so traditionally, they did it out here as well too. Everything else is concrete because, again, there's water, and also concrete because it was faster to make. And also concrete because you could really paint on it and create that sense of rock work as that goes through. Now, as I said, the sad thing is that the Disney company has decided that No Song in the South shouldn't be released. So some of the story elements in there, when you see Briar Bear, you know, tied up and bouncing up and down, a lot of people go, "Well, how did that happen? What's going on with that?" But if you see the movie, you see that Briar Rabbit had been caught. And when Briar Bear came up, he says, no, I'm a scarecrow and I'm getting $1 a minute. But you can take my place. Well, why would you do that? Oh, because I got enough money. You know, you can get some. So Briar Bear fills up with that. So on July 17th, just a couple of days ago, we celebrated the double anniversary of Splash Mountain out in California and also out here in Walt Disney World. And in a way, also celebrated Song of the South, a film that Robert Iger said a year or two ago that, no, we're locking this away and you'll never see it again, ever. At least until Robert Iger leaves and somebody else comes in and says, well, maybe we could do this, maybe we could do that with that. And a couple of fun facts so you can go out and share with your friends and family, because I'm sure you're here because you're the Disney experts with your friends and family, right? When friends come out to visit and all of that, they go to you, they ask you these questions. Zippity-Doo-Dah does not exist in the Joel Chandler Harris books. It was created by Walt Disney himself, because he loved all sorts of little nonsense words like bibbidi-bobbidi-boo and supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, which, by the way, the Sherman Brothers heard at summer camp when they were kids, and they learned it because it irritated adults. It was supposed to be longer than anti-disestablishmentarianism, and so they use it. People tried to sue and say, "Oh no, they stole the word from us," but research showed that the supercalifragilisticexpialidocious existed at least as far back as 1918 for that to happen. The little bluebird, Mr. Bluebird on my shoulder, the person doing the chirps for that, Clarence Ducky Nash, the voice of Donald Duck, because he started his life as a bird call imitator. And so whenever they had birds to do and all, they would pull in Ducky, and he would do some of that. He actually does some of the birds in the background in the Enchanted Tiki Room for that to happen. So there are all sorts of wonderful things about that. I've got just a little bit of time, but I think one of the things I'm going to do is I just came back, just actually about 5 days ago, from Detroit, Michigan. I was in Detroit, Michigan. They rededicated a old movie palace, the Redford Theater. And what they did is they were showing Mary Poppins on the big screen. They had a theater organ playing before that. They had people dressed up as Bert and Mary Poppins, and they had Jim Korkis come up there and talk before the film, and then try to sell books afterwards. But some of I know that some of you are excited that there's a new Disney film coming out this December called Saving Mr. Banks, which is about the battle between Walt Disney and P.L. Travers, who wrote the Mary Poppins stories, about Mary Poppins, doing Mary Poppins. And so I've got a few minutes, so I'll tell you a couple of quick little stories about Walt and P.L. Travers so that you will really be on top of things when you talk about that. Walt first became aware of the Mary Poppins books in 1943. That's when the third Mary Poppins book came out. Walt was in his living room, and he was going through stuff that he brought home from the studio, and then he heard this laughter coming from his daughter's bedroom. His daughter Diane was 11 years old, and he went in, and Diane's mother, Walt's wife, Lillian, was there, and she was reading chapters out of the new Mary Poppins book. You know, and they both looked at Walt, and they said, this would be a great, film to do. And then Walt's youngest daughter, Sharon, said, oh, yes, do it. So in 1944, Walt contacted P.L. Travers and said, well, I'm Walt Disney, and I'm interested in doing, Mary Poppins. And by then, the name Walt Disney really meant something, because, my gosh, this is the guy who, did Snow White and Mickey Mouse and all that. And P.L. Travers hung up on him. And so Walt called her again. He said, no, you don't understand. This really is Walt Disney. And she says, I'm not interested. He says, what? She says, well, you're going to make it a cartoon. And I don't want Mary Poppins to be a cartoon. And he says, no. He says, I'm in the process now of making a film combining live action and animation. Song of the South. See how I can tie all these things together? How clever I am. And she hung up on him. So Walt kept asking. Finally got into the 50s, and his brother Roy looked at him and said, why are you pushing so hard on this? There's so many other things we can do, and there's other things. Why do you keep pushing on Mary Poppins? And he said, I promised my daughters a parent should keep his promise to his children. And so in 1959, he was over there. He was doing some live-action films in England. He was doing Robin Hood and Treasure Island and all of that. And what had happened is P.L. Travers had fallen on some rough times. Her books were not selling as well as they had in the past and all that. So her lawyer negotiated a contract. So she got $100,000 up front, which is roughly about $2 million today, plus 5% of anything from Mary Poppins. So every time the film is shown, every time Mary Poppins is dancing on ice, every time there's a Mary Poppins doll, 5% of that would go to P.L. Travers. Also that she would be a consultant on the film. She would be asked her opinion about certain things, but most importantly, and Walt never did this before, never did it again, she had final script approval. The film would not be made until P.L. Travers said, yes, I like that script. And Walt figured, she knows nothing about film and all of that. She's going to defer on Walt Disney, all of this. He actually brought her out and took her around Disneyland, gave her a personal tour. She didn't understand what Disneyland was at all. Showed her they were filming Babes in Toyland at the time, and she was appalled. There was a scene where Ed Wynn had been shrunken down and put in a bird cage, and she said, did you steal that from one of my books? No. This is, it went all through this. And so they sat down in the room, and the Sherman Brothers, along with Don DeGrady, had come up with a rough screenplay. The Sherman Brothers had actually come up with a lot of the songs. They wrote 32 songs for Mary Poppins. Less than half of those are used in the film. The very first song they wrote was Feed the Birds. It was also the very last scene that was filmed. It had Jane Darnell, who was 83 years old. She had won an Oscar for Grapes of Wrath. Walt went down to the Motion Picture County home and said, "You're the perfect, you have to do this." He sent down a limo for her, said it was only going to take one day of shooting. On the St. Paul Cathedral steps, they cut out a section of steps and filled it with pillows for her to sit on. You know, all of this wonderful. So anyway, the Sherman Brothers, started with the first sentence of the screenplay. And Pamela Travers says, no, that's rough, that's coarse, that's you can't absolutely do that at all. Every single word. Oh, you say here you're going to hire a nanny. No, that does not happen. You employ a nanny or you engage a nanny. You do not hire a nanny. And she kept going through all of these. You can't say, let's go fly a kite. In Edwardian England, you would say, let's go and fly a kite. She's going through all of these things and over and over and over. And they had built up the part of Bert, the chimney sweep, because Walt had asked Cary Grant to do the part. And Cary Grant was interested. P.L. Travers was not. No, he is not Bert. He can audition for the father, but he can't play Bert. And just kept going through these things over. Walt said, well, Mary Martin. We were thinking Mary Martin, for Mary Poppins. No, absolutely not. Maybe Julie Harris. Does Julie Harris even sing? Well, it doesn't make any difference. I don't know why you have these songs here at all. These songs have to go. If you're going to use songs, you need to use songs that were familiar to the time period, like Greensleeves and Tarara Boom Die. I don't understand what these songs are doing here at all. This went on all day. At the end of the day, Walt grabbed his hat, looked at the Sherman Brothers and said, "Boys, she's all yours." He got into his car and drove to his vacation home in Palm Springs, where he stayed for 2 weeks. For 10 days, Pamela Travers going through the script. In fact, the last day she was there at the studio going through the script, Walt had put her up at the Beverly Hills Hotel. She went there. She took 14 sheets of their pink paper. Hotels often have complimentary. And she typed out 14 pages of notes that she had forgotten to say in the last 10 days. And she mailed it in. And this went on forever, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And it gets even worse. She's constantly sending all of these notes to Walt, and Walt is working his way around them. The Jolly Holiday scene, it was going to be a chalk painting, and everybody would be live actors. They wouldn't be animated characters. And Walt saw that there was going to be waiters, and he says, when I think of waiters, I always think of penguins. And they went, oh, no, Walt wants us to train penguins. No, he had just seen Song of the South again. He had pulled it out from the vault to take a look at it. And he thought, let's combine live action and animation. Well, Travers had heard, yes, there would be animated backgrounds, and then there would... At the premiere, 1964, Grauman's Chinese Theater, Walt had not invited P.L. Travers. She sent him a letter and said, "Oh, dear Walt, I'm going to be in Los Angeles on these dates. I understand there'll be a premiere. Can you tell me the date and time? I'm sure somebody somewhere will be able to find me a seat somewhere." So she shows up. She's in this white satin. The film starts. Tears come rolling down her cheeks. The reporters who were there, LA Times, all that, said she was so moved at seeing her characters up there that she could not control the joy. There were a couple of cynics that said she was crying because obviously the movie was going to be a success and she was going to be a very rich woman. P.L. Travers wrote, I was crying because I was absolutely devastated. I knew that I could never ever write another word ever in my life, and I would never be able to smile again. And at the end of the premiere, she ran out and she grabbed hold of Walt and she said, "We have to start editing on